Welcome. My name is Chris, and this is the Solstice podcast where we talk about small business, technology, and web development. If you enjoy the show, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment as a sacrifice to the algorithm. And without further ado, here's the episode. Hey, everybody. My guest today is the amazing David Morgan, also known as Guy Votta, depending on how you know him. He owns a number of different businesses, though I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, I just want to introduce the person behind the business. So, David, you want to go through kind of your first business, maybe like the first venture that you had, and then yeah, we can kind of go from there.
So we go way back in time to the 1980s. And back in the 80s, I had this calling to do medical stuff. And it was because I saw people get hurt. And I was part of the crowds that stood looking at the hurt person not being able to do anything and figured, I really want to be the person that helps. And my first training was as a first aider. Took a first aid class and I worked at a program that did hiking with kids, and I went out with them as the first aid specialist. And then somebody got hurt on the trip and I felt really good about myself because I was using my skills, and I was like, what else can I do? And I became a lifeguard, and I was doing really well as a lifeguard because I didn't have to really rescue anybody until the day that I actually had to rescue someone. And then the ambulance crew showed up and took the kid to the hospital. And I was like, I want to do that. And so I became an EMT back in 1987. And that was what I thought I was going to do for a while until I realized that all of the things that I was doing required training. And I had taken some good classes and some not so great classes. So I became an instructor of CPR and first aid and lifeguarding. And that took me into my college career of, I was a broke college student trying to figure out how I could make some money. I remembered that I was an instructor. So I started teaching classes on the side. And to make it legitimate, I went down to the county courthouse and I registered my company name. I believe the year was 1988, and the company name was Safety First. I don't even know why I came up with that. And I probably saw it someplace. And then it was born. And, I got my federal tax ID number and I was legit. And I remember the funniest part of business is the internet was non-existent at the time. It was brand new. So when websites first came out, I tried to register the domain safetyfirst.com. And back in the original days of the internet, people were smart and they started buying up domain names. And
Yeah.
Safety First was bought by a cheese company in Europe. And they bought it just to sell it and make money. And they offered to sell it to me. And I think they wanted like $1,000 at the time. But back in that day, that was a ridiculous amount of money. Today, it's nothing. But it was a ridiculous amount of money. I couldn't afford it. I offered them training in exchange for it. And they were like, no, we're holding out for cash. And so I couldn't afford it. So I came up with the next best website name I could think of, which was Think Safety. .com, because you should always think safety. So since I couldn't have safety first and I didn't want to be safety second, our company name was Safety First and our website was Think Safety. Looking back, was a pretty decent choice of a website.
Yeah.
And Safety First just taught classes, CPR, first aid, lifeguarding. And then Safety First got a little bit bigger and started going from teaching classes to doing lecture series in places, talking to folks. And then it went from classes and lectures into medical standby services. People were looking for a trained medical person at an event. And from trained medical person at event, we started getting phone calls to stand by at TV and film production, and new divisions were now growing. So Safety First today has an education division that we started with, teaching anything from CPR to first aid to lifeguarding to bloodborne pathogens, anything safety related. We have an instructor for that. And we still have our lecture series, but we don't give very many lectures anymore. It's just not a thing. Our TV and film production is pretty big. We have a team of set medics that go out and work on movie sets, TV shows, any place that somebody could get hurt behind a camera where they scream medic and the person comes out and does something quickly. We have a diagnostic division where we go out and do testing, either blood testing or just comprehensive testing. We have some nurses that will come out and do stuff for people in home because concierge services are kind of nice for folks. And then that started our emergency response division, where we started responding to 911 calls in the city that we were born in, which is Newark, New Jersey. Today, the Emergency Response Division has splintered off into a separate business entity known as the Vailsburg Rescue Squad. We started our business in the West Ward of Newark, which is Vailsburg, and our give back to Newark from giving us so much is we now provide volunteer, aka free, emergency medical services care using an ambulance, a first response vehicle, and an EMS motorcycle in the West Ward of Newark. So that's business number one, which transitioned into business number three, because business number two came in the middle.
Right, yeah. And actually, I think when I first got to know you, this is like in 2007, I think you were, I just remember thinking like, oh, like David is an EMT. And I didn't realize that you had started already safety first way back then. I thought this was actually something that came later. But like, were you doing this in college then? Because it sounds
Yeah,
like you were.
this is how I bought meals in college. If it wasn't for CPR classes, I didn't have a meal plan. I went to Rutgers Newark and I worked all day as an EMT on the ambulance and I went to classes at night. I was going full time night while working full time during the day. And the disgusting thing was like, the cafeteria closes when night classes start. So you have to buy food. And if you're a broke college student, you need money. So my actual job paid my rent. And then teaching classes allowed me to eat.
Right, man. Wow, that is a crazy struggle to go through. But yeah, that I didn't realize that you had actually done that way back in college. That's amazing. Because I feel like most people that when they start a business, well, first off, most people start a business and it just flops immediately. But do you feel like it didn't flop because you just needed it to not flop? Like, do you feel like it was the need?
Very much like the incredible luck in choosing a really good website name. Like looking back, like I don't know how I came up with the concept of think safety, but it was pretty good. The business plan was one that was needed. People need safety training. And I took safety training to become the first aider or the lifeguard or the EMT. So it seemed to make sense that other people would need training too. And, to this day, people need training all over the place. And so it was a really great business model. Find something that people need, provide it better than somebody else is providing it. And that was my plan of teach better than someone else.
Yeah, you did say that you saw that some of the classes that people were giving, were they just like not instructive or they just like weren't interesting or something?
I think that's what it is. There's different ways you can present information. And so information is what it is. Like this is the stuff, but how I deliver it is what makes the difference. And there are classes that I took where it was the snooze fest of how
Yeah.
can I stay awake during this? And then the bad news is if I don't learn this, somebody might die. So it's kind of important that we learn this stuff. So it's like the other side is when you're teaching medical stuff, dead is always an option. So if it's such a heavy topic, how do we deliver it in a way that isn't going to stress the students out, that is going to keep them interested and focused? And one of the things that I learned as a young instructor is how to deliver content. And I took a job before I created my company as a CPR instructor, and I was working for this company in New York that no longer exists. It was called Emergency Skills Incorporated. It was a terrible name, but it was a great company run by a woman who just wanted to have safety training. She was not an instructor herself. She would
Hmm.
hire instructors, but she didn't hire instructors to teach classes. She hired the instructors to sign the certification cards. She hired actors to teach classes. She took actors
Really?
in New York City that were in between gigs or didn't, had free time. She gave them a script of this is how you're going to teach this class. she came up with a very good delivery system for kind of sad training. And my job as the instructor was to sit in the back of the room in case somebody had a question while the actor was acting in the front of the
No
room.
way.
I could answer the question, and at the end of the course, I would sign the cards because I would certify that the course was delivered to the standards of the training that was needed. And that taught me how to teach.
Wow. Because the actors, you feel like they did a good job at like presenting themselves, I guess, and the information. Yeah.
Look, whatever you show you're watching it for a reason, right? They drew you in. These
Mhm.
characters got you. And so these actors drew their audience in. They knew how to engage people. And so they delivered their script in an engaging way. And I was like, why isn't everyone doing this?
Taking acting classes.
You know, taking acting classes, but like delivering better content. And the truth be told, that is the only thing that separates training. Training is what it is, but better training is delivered in a way that the audience receives it in a more positive way.
Okay. Wow. That's really interesting. So that actually leads in really well to how I actually know you, which is from you were one of my first capoeira teachers. Yeah, again, this is like in 2007, so it's been a while now. God, it's actually almost 20 years, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, I remember you were teaching the capoeira classes, and the thing that really like struck me, I remember at the time was like I was like, man, David or Guy Votta, as we would call you, because that's your capoeira like nickname. It was like, man, this dude is such a badass. Because I remember seeing one of the videos of you at one of the Kyokushin karate tournaments, and I was like, holy crap, this guy's a beast, is a monster. This is like short hair. I don't know when it was, but yeah, you had that video, and I mean, I guess you've been doing martial arts for like, were you doing it like through college, even like at that time?
So, college is when sort of, I guess, everything happened. I had done point style karate, like Taekwondo, since I was a kid. And I didn't really love it. When I was a teenager, I found something that was a little bit more intensive where you actually got to hit people because we wore body plates. So it was a little bit more exciting to me. In college, I found an art called Inshin, which is a split off of like Shotokan and Kyokushin. It's all the same guys, but they were bare knuckle fighters. They were just like, we're gonna fight. There's no gloves. There's just two people step into the ring. It's sort of what MMA is today without titles and names. It's like cage fighting without a cage. And
Yeah.
I loved it, which was the incredible conflict within me. I can remember being at tournaments and seeing guys get knocked out and getting up to go help. I can
Wow.
remember being in tournaments and knocking people out and then helping them back up. Like, oh man, like such a conflict. But
Wow.
that sort of is what happens to us as we grow and develop. And so in college, I got safety first and I've got karate, and these two things are going sort of against each other to the point where in the late 90s, I stopped competing. I was competing professionally for like 8 years and I was hurting a lot of people. I mean, I had a great record. And when you got a great record in full contact, it means a lot of people get hurt. And like, it's like people's knuckle or teeth marks in my knuckles. It's terrible. And so I quit. And fortunately, my sister, who is also a capoeira teacher today, her name's Borboleta. Her real name is Aisha, and she's in Washington, D.C. She would plan a family trip every year. And in 1998, she gives me the phone number to the travel agent to call to get the tickets for the trip that she's booked. And all I needed to know was like who to call and how much to pay. I had no idea where we were going until I saw the tickets. And I was like, oh, we're going to Brazil. And she planned a trip to Brazil, but not really. Somebody just told her to go to Brazil and it was like February is a good time to go. And me and a bunch of other medical people at the time, Borboleta Aisha was a doctor. So all of us healthcare people, slightly intelligent, get on a plane to go to Brazil. And some of us had those books. One of them was Lonely Planet. There was a couple
Oh
other
yeah.
guidebooks.
Yeah, yeah.
And everybody's sharing these amazing things about Brazil, like cleanest beaches, warmest water, best music, language, Portuguese. And we're like, wait, what? None of us spoke Portuguese. We all spoke street Spanish because you treat patients in the city, you speak street Spanish. Now we're paying attention to the books, and the books are like, money unit is the real. And we're like, what is that? How much is that? The book won't tell you. And again, like internet's not really a thing. So,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't like no Wi-Fi on planes back then. And so we're stuck with a book. And so
Right.
it gets worse. They're like, hotel reservations for Carnival are needed 8 to 12 months in advance. And we're like, when is Carnival? And then reading the book, usually in February. And we're like, it's February. And then we look at everybody on the plane and how they're dressed. They're all dressed for Carnival. And so we're going to Brazil for Carnival. We don't speak Portuguese. We have no money. We don't know anyone. We have no hotel reservation.
Wow.
This should have been a nightmare of a trip. And there's this thing in Brazil that you know of because you do capoeira called axé. And axé is the magical force that moves things. And that magical force moved us into the right place. But
Mhm.
with axé, you don't always know what's going to happen. And so I think it's time, since we're on Brazil, it's the shirt change moment of like, let's get into the Brazil look here of we get off the plane in Brazil and we speak no Portuguese and we're standing around, and I recognize that the 9 of us look like the people from Kansas that get off the bus at Port Authority, and they're looking around because they have no idea what's going on. And so some guys come over to us and they're wearing brown uniforms, like it's a uniform. It's got like a Brazil flag on it. And they're in bad English. Do you need help? And we're like, yes, we need help. And they're in bad English. Do you have a hotel? And we're like, no. And they're like, do you have money? And we're like, no. And the guy's like, okay, first money, then hotel. And we're like, okay. So he takes us to the ATM machine. Now, we don't know the money. We know it's a real. We don't know what it's worth. But at the time, back in the 90s, there was a max on ATMs. You could take $300 a day out of an ATM. So we figure we'll take the max out of the ATM, which will be $300. That's a good amount of money to get started with. We
Yeah.
did not understand the exchange rate, which at the time was 5 to 1. We take 300 US times 5 out
Right.
of the ATM. All 9 of us take this amount of money.
Wow. All of you guys?
9 people
Oh my God.
withdraw, right? 3 times 5 is 15. 1,500 reais times
My God.
9 people. We got like $15,000 because even though it's a 5 to 1 exchange, it's a 1 to 1 buy. 1
Right,
real
right,
buys the same thing $1 does. So we
right.
legit had 1,500 Brazilian dollars. So no clue, right? Still like, duh. They take us to the elevator to get us to a hotel, and we start going down and down. And I'm like, why are we going down? And then I look at their uniforms, and there's like nothing. There's just brown. All it's got is a Brazilian flag on it. And then I recognize, like, these are the maintenance guys, like the guys that sweep up in the airport. They're not like airport helpers. They're just dudes that clean the floors. And I was like, they're gonna rob us. We took this to an ATM.
In the
We're going to the
basement.
basement, right? And I'm like, well, you picked the wrong one, dude. I'm a bare knuckle fighter. Like, you 2 guys are light work right now. This is going to be easy. The doors open up and there's 6 more guys outside the elevator. And now I'm quickly computing the math of like, I can take 2, no problem. My friends, they're not so much fighters. They're like doctors and shit. So like, maybe they can like keep the other 6 busy while I go through them one by one. And then it gets worse. The dudes pop the trunks of their cars. And I'm like, they're gonna kill us. Oh my God. One of the guys walks over in the most perfect English you've ever heard. And he's like, welcome to Rio de Janeiro. My name's Flavio. I'm going to be your tour guide while you're here. Can I take your bags? And I'm like, wait a minute. This is the Axé of Brazil. We met a guy. And so, yes, it was a total scam of the guys that clean up look for people that are lost, and they take you to the basement where like the unauthorized tour guide guys are, and they get a kickback, right? So great, we don't
Yeah.
care. We had a tour guide for the whole week. Tour guide puts our stuff into the car. Him and his friends, they're driving us from the airport into Copacabana. He's on his cell phone, finding us a place to stay, gets us a 3-bedroom apartment in a doorman building 2 blocks from the beach in Copacabana.
Wow.
Axé of
Victory.
Brazil.
Man, that's awesome. But that was your first trip to Rio. How long was the trip? Like a week or something like
So we
that?
spent a week in Rio and then a week in Bahia. And so in the
You
week
guys went to
in
Bahia.
Rio, yeah, the week in Rio, since I had recently stopped fighting, but it's always in you. So I was like, I'm gonna train while I'm here. And they had Vale Tudo there, where it's just like beat the crap out of each other, submission
Really?
hold. And I loved it because it was like what I used to do, except we never did submission holds. I was like, you mean I could
Yeah.
choke somebody? This is great. So we get to Bahia and I'm pumped now. I'm like, where's the Vale Tudo? Where is it? And they're like, we don't got that. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's your national martial art. And they're like, no, it's not. Capoeira is our national martial art. And I was like, I don't care. Bring it. What? So they're like, okay, 4:30 over there. 4:30, we go over there. It's a praça. It's Praças de Artes. It's the arts terreiro where all these guys sell craft stuff. And I'm waiting and I'm like pumped up and I hear this blingity bling sound coming from down the block. And I'm like, oh, it's like Muay Thai. They play music when they come in and then they
Yeah,
start
yeah, yeah.
banging. And so here comes the guys, like with the bang bangs in the hands and the bling blings in their hands. And then they start floating in the air and kicking and doing these amazing movements. And I was hypnotized. And then at the end of it was samba. And so it's like the booty shaking. And so my sister Borboleta, then she's hypnotized because she's like, whoa, booty shaking. And they offered us classes. And so we took
Wow.
private classes. These were the students from the Escola de Mestre Bimba. They were from Mestre Bimba's academy. They were under
Wow.
Mestre Bamba. So my very first capoeira
Mestre Bamba.
class was in Mestre Bimba's school on Rua Laranjeiras. The
Yeah.
first capoeira school in the world is where I took my first capoeira class, and I spent a week taking private lessons in Mestre Bimba's academy. And before I had left Brazil at the end of the week, I had already booked a return flight to come back. I
Really?
went to
Wow.
Brazil between 3 and 4 times a year for the first, I want to say,
Really?
6 years of my capoeira life.
Wow, that many times. Holy crap.
I was hooked.
Wow. But it was because there wasn't really any place to train back in Jersey, right? I mean,
So,
where else could
again,
you?
internet was non-existent at the time. And so like I'm doing like this Boolean search for capoeira. And the only result that came back was an email at pegasus.edu, which is Rutgers, New Brunswick. And so I'm like, well,
Really?
there's capoeira in Rutgers, New Brunswick. I live in Newark. I'll drive to New Brunswick. So I send an email to that random email address of like, hey, just got back from Brazil. I want to train. And they're like, there's a school in Newark. And so they were the college class or club for the school in Newark, which was Groupe Liberdade under
What
Mestre
year was
Scott.
this?
This
What
was
year was this?
1999.
Oh, 99. Oh, yeah, that is right, right, right. I remember now. That's when you started. Wow.
99. And so
I didn't
now
realize they
the
had a
Axé
school
of
there.
Brazil came back to New Jersey with me because not only did I find an email address, and the email address I recognized because I went to Rutgers, Newark. I'm like, oh, that's Rutgers, New Brunswick. They tell me there's a school in Newark. My commute just got a whole lot shorter. And so I walked into 51 Bruin Street and they
51
welcomed me.
Bruin. I remember 51 Bruin Street. They had
Yeah.
like, I mean, after when I started going there, they already had like planks coming up like off of the floor and like the paint was falling off and everything. But it was so magical going there. I remember the energy was so good. And for people
It
who,
was the only capoeira school in New Jersey. So
that's true, it was the only school that's true. Because who else was around? It was just in New York. There was a few people. And
there was a
then
couple of folks.
that,
That was it. And nobody else had a school. So it was just, if you wanted a school,
right.
it was just 51 Bruin. And then, as the years went by, Capoeira starts to grow in New Jersey because all these other people start showing up. Who is now Mestre Glauber shows up, who is
Yeah.
now Mestre Joe, who is now Mestre Zumbi. And they were all professores at the time. I mean, Mestre Doutor was Professor Doutor back at that time. And because Newark had the only school, our events were amazing. Every year, everybody would come because it was the only event to go to in New Jersey.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, I got lucky that I got to meet all these incredible people. I had previously had a karate school because I was a karate guy, and I closed the
You had a
school.
karate school? I didn't know that.
Back when I was competing, I had a school. And so some
Whoa.
of my karate students came and joined the academy. And so I had an experience teaching martial arts, and I had this experience in capoeira because I was training not only at the academy, but in Brazil. So I was sort of on the advanced track of training. What that allowed me to do was whenever there was a performance, which there were regularly performances, Mestre Sagano would take all of the instructors to go perform. That would leave me to cover the classes in the academy. And so I was the class coverage person. And then I became the person who taught kids class. And then I became the person that taught kids class and covered regular classes. And then at some point in time, I was teaching all the classes in the academy. Mestre Sagano was moving to Brazil to retire, and I had somehow
Yeah.
inherited an academy. The problem was that brings us to your history of I was growing and I decided to open my own school in Montclair. I
Yeah.
had recently taught a class at the adult school at Montclair, and I had 35 people in it, and they all wanted to take class. So I needed to find a home for my new 35 students. And so I found a home and then didn't have my 35 students. They said they were coming, but they never did. And so we grew that space in Montclair that we eventually grew out of. And then we moved to Bloomfield, where we eventually
Yeah.
grew out of that. And now we're in West Orange in a space that, I would be very lucky if I can grow out of.
Yeah, yeah, it's an awesome space now, the one in West Orange. But I remember when did you start in Montclair? Because I think yeah, I was there in 2007, but you were there a little bit before that.
95 was our first batizado. So we moved there in 94, and a year later we graduated our first set of students in 95. And so everybody here this year is reminding me that this is like our 20th year of batizados, and they want us to put like a number 20 on our event shirt this year.
Wait, you were in Montclair in 1995? No, wait, or 2005, you mean?
2005,
Okay,
2005.
2005. 2005. Okay, that makes more sense. Wow. Okay, no, that makes sense. Yeah, because by the time I got there, there's already people who had been going there for a while, I remember. And yeah, I remember people would have been like, yeah, maybe have like a year or two. And for me, they were like, oh my God, these guys are incredible. These guys are the best. It's actually amazing how I saw that with a student of mine where he had been coming to class, to my capoeira classes for about a year, year and a half at that point, and everyone saw him and they were like, he's incredible. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. Like I love that they were feeling that way because it made me like remember that special feeling that I had and I was seeing it with other people now too. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So yeah, that's really amazing. Wait, so 20 years now,
Years.
20 years with capoeira, but like teaching capoeira and holding events.
This is our 20th year of having batizados.
Yeah.
So it's our 21st year of me having my own academy. And, it's more than that of doing this
Yeah.
thing. But today, all of the businesses have some sort of relationship. For example, the academy in West Orange is in a facility that is owned by Safety First.
Mm,
Academies can't really afford space. Academies
yeah.
barely survive. So academies can pay the bills. The academy can pay the light and the heating bill, but Safety First owns the property, which allows me to do more with the property. So we have CPR and first aid classes here on the property now because we own it.
Wow.
We rent out space to other artists. So our dance studio is used by a group of cheerleaders. It's used by a couple of dance teachers, a couple of Zumba teachers. There's a church group that rents our space on Sundays because they don't have their own location. It allows us to do more with the space.
Yeah, yeah. So why? Well, you've been so safety first, even that's like 30 years ish that you've had, or more even.
Yeah, Safety First was, yeah, 89, I think, was the year that we incorporated.
30, yeah, 36 years, I guess, this year. 36. Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's incredible. And I was telling you before the call, I was like, one of the reasons why I started my business with my wife is because I wanted to get out of the corporate rat race. But you were way ahead of the curve. You were like way ahead. You were just at, I'm gonna go straight to doing this by myself, which is really awesome.
Things like, I'm sure you have a story of why. Like, there's always a reason. I don't think anybody wakes up one day and, like, I think I want to do this.
Yeah.
At the time, I was a hospital administrator. I had grown in the ranks of healthcare. After graduating from college, I became a hospital administrator. I was the administrator for surgical patient care services. I had 13 different units in the hospital and a ridiculous budget and a lot of employees that I was managing. And I did not love the direction that healthcare was traveling in back in the mid 90s. It wasn't good at all. It wasn't a patient care focused, it was a financially driven focus. And that really wasn't why I got into healthcare. So I
Mm.
wanted to be out. And as things go, the hospital sent me to a seminar in Florida at the Disney Institute of Management. And it was a program that they would make to teach people how to think out of the box. And I don't think that they read the entire description of what they were sending me to. The topic was creative thinking, which was how to manage projects better, but the focus was on entrepreneurship. And I spent the entire flight back using all of the tools that they had just trained me on in the past week on figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I treated my life like a
Wow.
project, like I project managed myself, and I looked at my options of what I could do with my life. And the choice that I made was that I loved teaching, and I had done this thing called Safety First for so long and it was great. So 1996, I quit my job. Like, drove to work and got there and made it to 11:30 in the morning and then left. And then the very next day it was Safety First full time. And so since 1996, I've been running Safety First full time.
Full time from then. That's actually, yeah, that's crazy. So you had that feeling back then, but that's like a lot of responsibility because you're doing this like a little bit out of college. Why do you think that? Do you think you were just doing a really good job? That's kind of how you got there. Like, what do you think it was that? Because if you're managing like a lot of people out of this, like maybe it's a hospital or whatever it was. Yeah, I'm imagining like someone must have been like, David's really on his stuff. Do you feel like you kind of gave that impression?
I was really good at what I was doing because they had trained me very well. Like, I went through a rigorous training program at the hospital, like, to be a better administrator. And it was an amazing program, but again, I didn't like the direction that healthcare was traveling in, and it wasn't making me happy. It was making me miserable.
Yeah.
And when you tell yourself that you don't want to do something anymore, if you have another option, you should get out. And I looked at my options and I had a get out option. My get out
Mm,
option was Safety First. It was like this
right.
little fun thing that I did in college, but once you register a business, it's still there. And so I left my full-time job on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday I started cold calling clients to teach classes for them.
Wow. So did safety first kind of like stop for a little while then? It was like a little break and then you came back to it?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really doing anything with Safety First between 92 and 96. Maybe I taught 3 classes a year. I would train some friends and that would be about it, offer some community classes, but there wasn't a lot going on. And I recognized that it fed me in college. Could it pay my mortgage in 1996? And it turns out it paid my mortgage and it fed me from 96 to 2025.
Oh, that's so cool, man. And now like it's amazing because now you're planning a lot of trips to Brazil too, because I guess now with safety first, maybe you have a little bit more freedom to kind of do those things. but you're planning the trip to go to Bahia like every year, basically. And I guess you're kind of like giving that experience that you had going to Brazil to other people, which is really cool. Do
I
you?
got really lucky with mine, and I met people at the same time that had not so lucky experiences. For every great story you hear, there's a horrible story. And I wanted to make sure that the people that I knew could have the same experience that I had. I got really lucky that I met amazing historians in Brazil, what we call the old guard of teachers. And it was just random that I would meet people and make friends with them and before I even knew who they were. Like, oh, you're super famous. Like, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And today I I take people to Bahia and I introduce them to everybody that I can. And I show them the magic that I found. And what's amazing about Brazil is like, it's always the same and it's always different. Every year when we go, it's the same place, it's the same country, same state, same city, but some of the people have changed. There's different people, there's more people, there's new classes, there's new drummers. There's always something new. I learn something every single year, but every August, we pick August because it's towards the end of the summer when kids are getting ready to go back to school. And it just seems like it's also great weather in Brazil, not too hot, not too cold. And we spend a week immersed in Brazilian culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have like a favorite part of the trip? Because I know you guys do the samba, the drumming, uh, capoeira. You do a bunch of things. Is there anything that like you really like as a
Yeah,
highlight?
it's funny because like everything is the best when we're doing it. So when we're
Yeah,
walking the
right.
streets and they're practicing for Carnival and we stop to listen to a live samba band, I love it. And when we're in drumming class and we're learning capoeira beats and samba beats and candomblé beats, I'm loving it. And when we go to the baile folclórico, which is the folkloric show, I'm loving it.
Yeah.
When we're eating food that this woman who's a Baiana has made for us for our lunch today, I'm loving it. It's amazing.
Yeah. Sounds amazing. Sounds amazing. It makes me. I was just saying. I after coming back from Argentina, I was like, man, I really want to go to Brazil. It's been like years since I've gone now. I think the last time was like in 2020, like right before the pandemic. And before that, I was going like every 2 years, maybe something like that. And yeah, it was like 2019, 2018 or 17. Yeah, so it was a lot. And now I haven't gone in like 5 years. And I'm like, man, I really miss it actually. I have to get a plane ticket ASAP to get over there. And actually, I don't know, have you gone to like the little beach towns like around Bahia? You know what I'm talking about? Because there's tons of them. They're like all over the place, and they all have like the most amazing beaches ever, and like the little communities are really cool.
That is, again, the Ashe of Brazil is that every state is amazing and every state has something. And so I've been to a bunch of different states. We choose Bahia as the location for this trip because everything that we need is in one place. It's like bringing a bunch of people who've never been to New York to Greenwich Village. Everything that you need is within walking distance of where you want to go. There's so many academies in Pelourinho. There's so many museums there. That is where the drummers all practice for Carnival. So
Yeah,
it means that we just can sit down in front of a building and watch Brazil go by. A samba band will go by. A famous capoeira teacher will go by. It will all pass right in front of you if you just sit right there. So that's the reason why we chose Bahia. We offer
yeah,
each year for people to do day excursions off of my trip. Like, look, I've set this up. If you want to go to this beach, the car will pick you up. You can go. And I find most people don't go on these day excursions because they're like, but if I go, I'm going to miss this class. And
yeah.
I'm like,
Right,
yeah, but you can do this. The
right.
other thing that we have offered, I found, is we get a lot of couples on the trip, husbands and wives. And
Cool.
I always tell the husbands and wives, like, there is a married people day on our trip where anybody married gets in that car and leaves. And I send them off with a tour guide who takes them around and shows them different things outside of the main part of Salvador. And the whole idea is to like save the marriage. You can't spend 7 days like intensive doing this. You got to have some like romantical time. And so
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
go off on a couples only tour where you can hold hands and look at this and like walk off and have a drink together. Like you sit for the sunset at, it's a beautiful couples day. Still
Sounds
Brazil,
nice.
still Bahia, still historical, yet couples only. So it's just love.
What are the single people doing during this time?
They follow the regular schedule, which is like the regularly scheduled classes.
Oh, okay. They're going to like the normal classes
Right.
during this
I,
time.
I
Okay.
pull the couples out for a day. I'm like, you guys, you got to go. You got to
That's
go.
really funny. And people don't really realize, but those drummers, I'm pretty sure they practice like all year round. Like all the dancers, the drummers, they're literally Carnival ends, and then the next day or the next week, whenever they're back in action, immediately they're getting back to practicing, setting up for the next year, right?
Just think of there's like at least 20 samba bands in Salvador, and they practice every day someplace. They not only practice in their room, so you hear drumming all the time, but they
Right.
practice walking the streets as if they would for Carnival. So that's why I said you can go sit out on the curb and an entire samba performance is going to come by you at some point.
Yeah, that's incredible. Do you think that there's like something about that? Like, it's like kind of like an obsession. I mean, like anyone who practices something, anyone who wants to be good at something, they're gonna take that approach where they're just always in the process of practicing. But I don't know. Do you think there's anything particular about the way they kind of approach things, where they kind of like because in my perspective, I see it. I'm almost like it seems like a frenzy, almost like we have to get ready for the next year. It's like the next year is coming, and we have to be there. But I don't know. Maybe do you find like there's something like interesting, something we can kind of take away from the way they kind of practice over there?
Because we're not from there, we don't feel it the way they feel it. Carnival is a thing to them. To
Yeah.
us, it's like some kind of party. To them, it's a cultural expression, like, and they live for this. And then there's always another side to these things. So when you think about the samba group that is walking by, it's made up of people from this place. And this is their actual job as they're walking and practicing, people are paying them. Like they stop and they perform.
Really? Wow.
So, like we sit down, right? And samba band comes by and they see a group of people sitting, they stop and they drum and they play and they,
Really?
put out a little thing. And so they are able to pay those drummers a fair day rate for practicing for drumming for Carnival.
Wow. So it's almost like the street performers in New York where they kind of like, but they're practicing for Carnival. That's
Right.
the only difference, I guess. They're doing
That's
their
it.
thing in the street, whatever, but they're also
They're
getting ready
getting
for this big
paid to
event.
practice for Carnival.
Wow. That is nuts. What a different like universe.
So, like we should be so lucky. And so like I guess that's how we bring this to the wrap of you and I have to figure out how we can financially support ourselves doing the things that we love.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like anyone who is lucky enough to do that is in a great spot. And that's awesome that there's people like you who can actually like show that that's possible too. Because sometimes I feel like when people don't see examples of that sort of thing, they get really frustrated and, demoralized, really. I know I've been there for sure. Where I'm like, this is not possible. And yeah, it's like, well, that's part of why we're doing this, me and my wife, but it's also like so that we can enjoy our time together and enjoy our time on Earth. We're only going to be here for a little while. So yeah, so I think that's a cool way to wrap it up. Thanks so much, Guy Votta,
Thank you.
David, entrepreneur extraordinaire, mestre of capoeira, master of capoeira, right? This is the title.
Yeah.
And person who gives back to his community with his nonprofit. I'm sorry, say the name again one more time so people know what
So
it
the
is.
nonprofit is the Valesburg Rescue Squad, and it exists simply to provide emergency medical services to the people in the West Ward for nothing. And it's
Awesome.
funded by Safety First, which was the company that I started in Newark. And I think if it wasn't for what Newark gave me, I wouldn't be able to give back.
Awesome. That's a beautiful way to wrap it up. Thanks so much, David. Thanks so much for coming on here. And yeah, thank you. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.